good evening, everybody. Welcome to another session of IFA's virtual discussion on foreign policy. We had one on 7th of August. This time we have three very distinguished, eminent and knowledgeable experts to share their thoughts at different perspectives. I don't know what they are going to say, but I'm going to share my few outlines and then we will leave it to the panelists to share their thoughts. Now, I do admit that we do have problem with China, Pakistan, and Nepal. And from time to time, we have problem with Maldives, we have seen problems in Sri Lanka, and now we have problems in Iran. But if we take a broader view, in spite of all this, if we take a broader view of India's foreign policy since 2014, I think we have done reasonably well. Take the case of India-US relations, perhaps they have never been better. US is now India's largest trading partner. They treat us as a major defense partner on par with their closest allies for exchange and transfer of technology. We are participating in the largest number of joint military exercises. US thinks India is indispensable for Indo-Pacific region, especially for keeping the assertive China under check. We have seen multifaceted progress in India-US relations. A lot of it has happened because of convergence of national interest of two countries. But we must also give credit to the Prime Minister of this country who has developed unique technique to have the best of personal chemistry with two personalities, such contrasting personalities like President Obama and President Donald Trump. And today, if you see, this first time that President of the United States, the advertisement is carrying photograph Indian Prime Minister, Howdy Modi or Namaste in Ahmedabad in election time. And you have seen other candidate, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, greeting everybody on Ganesh Chaturthi. It's a good sign. Let's see now, relations with Germany, France, UK have improved. We have made some very deliberate attempt to reach out to Scandinavian countries and Central Asian republics, and also went up to Mongolia. Our relations in South America, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico are good. We are making inroads in Mercosur. And there has been exponential engagement with Africa. The sheer number of visits at the level of president, vice president, prime minister, which have been undertaken to Africa last 6 years, is more than all the visits in last 50 years. This interaction is spurring trade, business, and investment, and also some convergence on international issues. We've also created some strategic assets in Seychelles and Djibouti. I think this reflects our thinking. Then our relations have seen very productive improvement, Saudi Arabia and UAE. Then we have good relations with Oman and Qatar. And it's for the first time that Indian External Affairs Minister, late Srimati Sushma Swaraj, was invited for the OIC summit. We have very, very unpleasant memories of the earlier attempt to attend OIC summit, which is called Rawat fiasco. Now we have relations seem to have been soured to some extent with Bangladesh, supposedly on account of inadequate understanding of the CAA, and with Malaysia and Turkey is reported perhaps on account of abrogation of the Article 370. While all the heads of the state of the ASEAN group as the chief guest at the Republic Day in 2018 was a masterstroke, India's decision not to join RCEP hasn't gone down well with them and some countries of Southeast Asia. But our relations with Vietnam have improved in spite of pressure from China on Vietnam. Shinzo Abe, Japanese Prime Minister, has become very close friend of Prime Minister Modi, as is Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and our relations with these two countries have vastly improved. Though Masood Azhar was eventually designated as a terrorist by the UN, serious endeavors to get an entry in the nuclear supply group in furthering our prospect for becoming the permanent member of UNSC haven't produced desired result, and I think a lot of more work is needed in coming years. PM Modi is the most traveled Prime Minister of India. He has emerged as a leading world leader at regional, international, global summits. He was particularly applauded for his initiative in the launch of International Solar Alliance and for his role in the climate change discourse in general. Informal summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Wuhan, Mamallapuram, and getting the SAARC leaders for his inauguration in May 2014, and even his decision to drop by Nawaz Sharif in Lahore to wish him his birthday, can be seen as experiment in out-of-box diplomacy, which unfortunately did not produce the expected results. But I believe it's better to have tried and failed than never to have tried at all. Creative diplomacy isn't static. It keeps evolving, adapting as circumstances change. That is what India is doing under Prime Minister Modi. In the face of devastation caused by COVID-19 all around, India has done better than many other countries. Now, I will request Sri Ram Madhavji to initiate the dialogue, give an overview of India's achievement in the last 6 years. But before that, for the benefit of most of guests here, I will just read out a few lines about him as an introduction. A holder of master's degree in political science from Mysore University, Sri Ram Madhav has served as journalist for 20 years. He was assistant editor of a Telugu weekly called Jagrati and a monthly in English called Pragna. He joined RSS in 1981, was a member of its national executive and served as its national spokesperson from 2003 to 2014. He has been one of the National General Secretary of BJP since 2014 and a member of the Board of Governors of India Foundation. He is also a mentor of Vision India Foundation. He has authored many books. His latest, Uneasy Neighbors, India-China After 50 Years of War, has been widely talked about. He favors a more proactive role by India in the region to counter China's BRI. He is one of the most influential leaders of BJP and is credited to party's success in the Northeast region. Over to you, Sir Sri Ram Madhavji.
Thank you, Surendra Kumarji, for those kind words. Whenever we get introduced, we get to more about ourselves. Thank you. My pranams to all the eminent participants in this webinar, in this conference. Already, Shri Surendra Kumarji has enumerated all the achievements or all the good things that have happened in the last 6 years. I don't know if there is anything left for us, the panelists, to speak which is not already covered, which was not already covered. I mean, you are all experts. You know that foreign policy is at one level, it's a continuum. We have carried forward many good initiatives of the previous governments. We have strengthened India's traditional relationships in the world. We have had certain very important traditional relationships. Some of them have already been highlighted, like our relationship with countries like the USA, which Vajpayee has described as a relationship of the natural allies. That relationship has been strengthened much further, initially under President Obama and subsequently under President Trump. Similarly, the relationship with the European Union, especially the individual countries in Europe, whether it is Germany or it is France or it is, UK. Similarly, the relationship with Japan, with Russia. These all have been very important traditional relationships that India has enjoyed. And we have definitely strengthened those relationships, deepened those relationships. But every government, every leader adds his own flavor to foreign policy, his own nuances to foreign policy. Prime Minister Modi has added a few very important nuances to it. One of them, I think, is this policy of de-hyphenation. In the past, we used to look at a given relationship from the prism of sometimes the third country, how the third country will react. In the last 5-6 years, Prime Minister Modi has tried to do away with that practice of looking at a given bilateral relationship from the prism of a third country. He tried to develop standalone relationships with countries. It had a risk involved in it. Yet, at the end of the day, if you look back, this effort of de-hyphenation has actually ultimately resulted in securing us rich dividends. Today, we have very good relations with, for example, with Israel on one side and Iran on the other side, Israel on one side and Palestinians on the other side. We have good bilateral relationship with the USA. It has been a very strong and traditional relationship, but similarly old and strong relationship has been our relationship with Russia. With China also, we tried to maintain a good relationship. So this de-hyphenation, where we build standalone relationships with the countries, keeping the bilateral interests and interests of our country in mind, has been one important addition to the foreign policy by our government. In this, we also emphasized on the question of strategic autonomy. Because when you look at a relationship from the prism of a third country, you are somewhere compromising with your autonomy, with your strategic autonomy. But here we emphasized that we value our strategic autonomy. I mean, there can be any number of examples, but the most recent one has been the issue of these S-400 missile platforms that we decided to go ahead and import from Russia, despite a lot of opposition and a lot of pressures from some of the other countries. This is one example, but several such examples can be given. So the important additions from our side could be, one could be this de-hyphenation, the other could be this strategic autonomy. Purely in terms of foreign policy as a philosophy, Prime Minister talked about Panchamrut, 5 pillars of the foreign policy. The 5 pillars that he has highlighted were Samman, dignity and respect, honor of the country. When I say honor and dignity of the country, honor and dignity and security of every Indian living anywhere in the world. There was a mention about Madam Sushma Swaraj. The way she used to respond to the concerns or problems of individual Indians living in different countries is an example of this commitment to the dignity, honor and safety of every Indian. Secondly, Samvad, greater engagement. Sri Surendra Kumar just talked about, described Prime Minister Modi as the widely traveled Prime Minister. He also holds a record of the Prime Minister meeting maximum number of foreign visitors. I don't know if somebody lists out the number of people he has met in PMO in the last 6 years. It will exceed the number of probably people many other Prime Ministers have met together. So he has extensively engaged with people, not just with the leaders, not just with the politicians, but even from sports persons, even from social leaders to NGOs to technocrats to many people. Extended engagement. In that, very important contribution of Prime Minister Modi is the engagement with diaspora. This diaspora engagement has had long-term and very important implications for our foreign policy. That is Samvad. Thirdly, of course, Samruddhi, prosperity, economic engagement with countries, and Suraksha, security engagement. But the 5th important pillar that he has added is Sanskritic, cultural engagement, civilizational and cultural engagement. Generally, not to comment adversely about the previous governments or anything, but I am just, as a matter of fact, I am stating that culture never used to be seen as a tool of diplomacy in a big way. Even when we were doing it, using it, we would use it in a very subtle manner, not very pronounced way and all that. But in the last 5-6 years, a conscious effort has been made to use cultural and civilizational relations or linkages as an important tool in our relationship. Prime Minister would visit a mausoleum in one country, a synagogue in another country, a church in one country, a temple in another country. So we were ready to wear this cultural diplomatic tool on our sleeves. That is one fifth important pillar that we have added. Most important achievement in the last 5-6 years, in my opinion, is the establishment of this concept of Indo-Pacific in the world. Although there have been attempts to make Indo-Pacific as the new parlance when it comes to discussing about our immediate region to the east, it became established in the last 5-6 years finally, especially after 2016 when President Trump also started talking about, started using this phrase Indo-Pacific. I think that is a very important, significant development under Prime Minister Modi in the last 5-6 years. His very important Indo-Pacific address at the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2017 laid out his vision for this region. We have had, just as we have had traditional strong relationships in the world, which we tried to strengthen in the last 5-6 years, we have had certain traditional challenges. We continue to face certain problems from those traditional challenges. As mentioned, rise of China, it continues to pose an important challenge for us, and that is leading to certain new types of problems in the immediate neighborhood for India. Immediate neighborhood, we have always considered, this again very old saying that neighborhood first. From there, we actually took it forward to together we grow. Yet we have certain challenges in the neighborhood, primarily because of the rise of China, but also because of several other factors. I don't just put the entire thing on China alone. Similarly, if at all there is any new Cold War of the 21st century, this is likely to be played out in our own neighborhood, in the Indo-Pacific region. These new challenges stare at us at this particular juncture after 5-6 years. Now, we realize this government understands that India's future lies to the east of its geography. The effort in the last 5-6 years has been to give this orientation to our foreign policy establishment. Foreign policy establishment is a very entrenched establishment. Hathi ka about turn nahi hota hai. Elephants don't do about turn. They take their own time to turn. We are so much westward bound, westward ho, that to convince the entire establishment that no, your interests in the next 50 to 100 years lie to the east of your geography. The Act East, the Indo-Pacific is the epicenter of 21st century geopolitics, is one major challenge. We are addressing it. We are trying to turn our attention more and more towards a region, which is namely the Indo-Pacific region, which I consider as the most happening region of the 21st century, most important region. And I am, for one, very convinced that it is going to be the future for India's diplomacy and foreign policy. I will end by saying here just one point, that from that perspective, when you look at several happenings in this region, Indo-Pacific region, I think India has to do much more. We still have not turned our full energies and attention to this region, although this region has emerged as the most important region. I said, if there is any, God forbid, any new Cold War, it is going to be played out here. We still have to turn our full attention to this region. In that sense, whether the decision about RCEP is to be taken as the final decision, or we should still keep one window open? I'm not saying door. Still, I'm only saying window open for any future possibility, because if you want to become a good global player, you cannot be out of all global institutions and then say that you want to be a global player. So in that sense, I think India has to play its cards very carefully and with much more thinking in the Indo-Pacific region. I will stop here and thank you, Surendra Kumarji, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ram Madhavji. You have given very exhaustive expose of what has been done. I will turn to my senior colleague, Ambassador Kamal Sibal. He doesn't need introduction. You see him on television channels every day. He writes 4 or 5 articles every week, and we all have seen him. And he was Foreign Secretary. He was Ambassador to Egypt, Turkey, France, and Russia. And he was honored by Government of India as Padma Shri. He holds a master degree in English from Punjab University. I will not go in more details because he is one of us. Ambassador Sibal, we have talked a lot about achievements. I have written to you that you might kindly enlighten us about the challenges we have faced, how have we have coped with those challenges. The initiatives were all well-meaning. You remember the first time after becoming Prime Minister went to Kathmandu, and it was a very successful project. Even Prachanda appreciated him. And then you look at the situation which we have. In Pakistan, same unprecedented initiative was taken. China initiative. There's no dearth of initiatives, but somehow all these initiatives did not really produce the result which you were expecting. So you are free to speak on any subject. My request will be that you can also enlighten the challenges, how we have handled them, and which of challenges are going to continue in coming years. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Surendra. I will focus on what you have outlined should be the substance of my intervention. Foreign policy is never static. Challenges will never end because you succeed in overcoming one challenge and a new challenge arises because you have to react to what is happening in the world. And one is not the only player in the world. So how significant countries, key countries, important countries handle international affairs, handle issues of governance, multilateralism, economic issues will impact on you. And since you are not in control of everything, these challenges will continue to remain. So having said that, I think one big challenge that we are going to face is how India is going to adjust to a post-COVID world. There is a lot of uncertainty ahead. I think we will see more fracturing. Multilateralism will be further weakened, especially with the weakening of the US and US decision to not project power as it used to in the past. And the US has been actually the fulcrum of multilateralism in the past, whether it has been for good or for bad, that's another matter. China's aggressiveness is going to be an issue and a challenge, not only for us, but for the international community. The consequences of the US-China tensions as they play out will be felt by all countries, including India. Europe is in disarray. And since Europe has traditionally, after 1945, been a major player in international relations, so disarray in Europe will also impact global governance and global issues and the handling of global issues in general. And this also will present a challenge to us. The UN, already dysfunctional, I'm afraid will become even more dysfunctional. The WTO is being debilitated, essentially because of US actions. Now with COVID, the world economy has entered into recession. As a result of that, you will see more protectionism, rising unemployment in countries. The terms of globalization are going to be redefined, as also the global supply chains. And then we see all this churning in West Asia. So India cannot remain aloof from all these problems, and our foreign policy has to grapple with them. Now, more specifically, I think one immediate challenge for us would be to find a new equilibrium with China. China is a direct neighbor. It claims our territory. It is encroaching into our territories. we now have seen that the bilateral mechanisms we have devised are not working, and in fact, they have given space to China to keep India under pressure. They will not clarify the LAC. The SR mechanism has not yielded results. The relationship with Pakistan will continue to pose problems for us, including the CPEC. It will continue to counter us strategically on all fronts, as it has been doing, and even more so now, whether it's NSG or Kashmir issue in the UNSC, is BRI projects, even if they receive a setback. Some core BRI projects, especially in our region, will continue, and therefore will be encircled strategically. Its maritime ambitions are a big challenge to us. It is trying to and succeeding partially in weakening us in our neighborhood. We see what is happening vis-a-vis happening in Nepal. Now we are seeing the possibility, I don't give too much importance to it, but nevertheless, it is something we have to monitor, a China, Nepal, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey axis developing. Now, with the aggression in Ladakh, I see a downward slide in our ties, which will have serious repercussions in Asia as a whole. India has already retaliated on the economic front, but if the situation doesn't get healed quickly, then there are political options, whether they relate to Tibet or Taiwan or whatever, we'll see. The second challenge is getting closer to the United States, but deciding how close. Because if you are going to have strategic autonomy, as Sri Ram Madhav has rightly said, then we have to be careful how much we embrace the United States, as also accept the fact that getting closer to the United States is in our longer term strategic interest. Now, there is uncertainty in the United States at present because of the November election. We will then be able to take a firmer view in which direction we go depending on the results of this election. Now, the trade ties are going to be a problem with the US, no matter what. Even if we have a broader security and strategic relationship, the pressure on trade will continue. The US record in terms of standing by its allies is not very reassuring. In the maritime domain, yes, we can do a lot together. But on land, we have to be very, very, very careful about how much we can rely on the United States and how much the United States would like to get involved in land disputes between India and China. The Pakistan factor, although it has become a little less troublesome for us in US foreign policy, has not gone away. Their discussions, their negotiations with the Taliban, giving Pakistan a role in Afghanistan, the whole policy in Afghanistan, this is not conducive to our interests. They have damaged our relations with Iran, and they are putting pressure on our ties with Russia. On human rights issues, the Democrats are pretty vocal, and this may not actually go away, especially if the Democrats come back to power. The US liberal press is unfortunately very anti-Indian, and the sections of our own diaspora, although I think Prime Minister Modi has done a wonderful job in bolstering India's ties with the diaspora. But in the academia and the civil society, there are elements in the United States of Indian diaspora, the activists who are doing a lot of damage to India's image. Then, of course, if you have to develop ties with the United States deeply, then they have to play a much greater role in terms of make in India in manufacturing, and especially in defense manufacturing. And then the whole issues of technology and access to technology, on which the United States is not very liberal. And finally, of course, the 5G question, how much we can cooperate with the United States and Japan and others to develop an independent 5G technology, which will counter China's advances in this region. The third challenge is keeping Russia on our side, because the content of our relations with Russia has got diluted a great deal. Defense remains a solid pillar, and energy is developing into another pillar, but that will not be enough to maintain close strategic ties, which will be comparable to the development of our strategic and other ties with the United States. So there always will be a tussle, especially as US-Russia ties are in very bad shape and there is no likelihood of their improving. We've also to look at possible cleavages that will begin to develop in Russia-China ties and how we could potentially benefit from it. Then we have to give fresh life to our neighborhood first policy. We've achieved successes in Maldives, let's say. In Sri Lanka, we were able to stabilize the situation. Bhutan our relations with Bhutan are in very good shape. In Bangladesh, there are some creases, but they are being handled. But Nepal has become a big problem. And I personally am aghast at the fact that Nepal is willing to join the developing China, Nepal, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey axis. I mean, this bodes quite ill for the development of our ties with Nepal. On BIMSTEC, as an alternative to SAARC, we have to continue to pay much greater attention. With Pakistan, I think we should leave that country to its own devices. The stalemate with Pakistan will continue. Imran Khan is deeply hostile to India, and he's deeply immersed now in Islamic politics. And now that after the abrogation of Article 370 and the redrawal of boundaries in J&K, the depth of frustration in Pakistan is immense. We have to watch very carefully the developing Pakistan-Turkey relationship. With Turkey, with Erdogan now wanting to become a leader of the Islamic world and having some defense technologies which are valuable, this relationship needs to be watched because they are now beginning to interfere in the Kashmir issue. We'll have to continue to deal with the instability in Afghanistan. I'm afraid the situation in Afghanistan is bound to deteriorate no matter what we say at the moment. Afghanistan is going to get Talibanized. There is a likelihood of a civil conflict and violence in that country, which may actually put into question the whole utility of the Chabahar project. The Chabahar project was intended to give Afghanistan, an independent, sovereign Afghanistan, a de-Talibanized Afghanistan, an alternative route which did not depend on Pakistan. But if Pakistan and Taliban are going to control Afghanistan in the medium term, then I'm afraid the Chabahar route will lose its strategic salience. Handling Iran is going to be a big issue. We need to keep our longer-term interests in Iran in mind, but Iran has also to be of the same mindset. But unfortunately, on the Kashmir issue, Khamenei himself has taken a hard line, and their foreign minister also issued some negative statements. The Arab-Israel reconciliation puts a lot of pressure on Iran, but opens up opportunity for us, makes Iran perhaps pay more attention to its relationship with India so that they try and maintain a certain balance. Palestinians are going to be a big losers in all this. We may continue to pay lip service to the Palestinian cause, but I think on that, the whole issue has taken a very different dimension. We have to strengthen the maritime security in the context of which the Indo-Pacific and Quad will become increasingly important. And I agree with Sri Ram that these are going to be the challenges. I'll just take 2 minutes more. These are going to be the challenges ahead. But we have to strike a very careful balance about taking a lead in terms of bolstering the Indo-Pacific and Quad and being responsive to the initiatives taken by others. It's a fine balance we have to take, because taking the lead will then actually make it expose us to the dangers of US or Australia or Japan making deals with China in the future and leaving it out in the cold. So therefore, we have to be very careful, and we have to persuade ASEAN to be more aware of the Indo-Pacific and the Quad concept actually helping them in order to deal with China as a second line of defense against China. Finally, we have to take some very important domestic decisions in terms of benefiting from the U.S.-China confrontation with regard to supply chains, and etc. But these are outside the realm of foreign policy, but will impact our foreign policy choices greatly. But that is not the subject of our discussion today. So, and finally, I'll end with the thought that because of all the challenges that we face, our target of developing a $5 trillion economy in the next 5 years, that is not going to happen. Because if that had happened, that would have given us the economic sinews to pursue to meet many of the challenges that we are facing. So we are in for a difficult period in terms of foreign policy, handling of foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very exhaustive, comprehensive scene of difficulties which we face. You have already taken away one question which I was going to ask about the 5 trillion economy, so you already answered it. Now we turn to Lord Meghnad Desai. All Hindu functions have to have a Lord, and we have our one Lord, Lord Meghnad Desai. And I'm thankful to him that he decided to join even when he's in quarantine. He came and then he agreed to be with us. So Lord Desai, you said you will speak on whatever others have not spoken. So field is yours. What you want to say, you heard others, you can react and share your own thoughts. But for the benefit of some of those who might know as much as they stood about Lord Desai, let me say a few things. He is Gujarati by birth, obtained master's degree from Bombay University and PhD from Pennsylvania University in USA, taught at LSE for decades and hung up his gloves as Professor of Economics in 2003. Currently, he is Chairman of Official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum and Meghnad Desai Academy of Economics, Mumbai. He has authored many books, including Marx Revenge, The Resurgence of Capitalism and Death of Restructured Socialism. Though he is known as economist, he has eclectic taste and has written on subjects other than economics: Rethinking Islamism, Ideology of New Terror, Rediscovery of India, and Nehru's hero, Dilip Kumar, and also a novel called Dead on Time. In 2017, he wrote a book, The Raisina Model, India's Democracy at 70. Over to you, Lord Desai. Are you there? No.
His mic is muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, good. Well,
You have
I
very
speak
nice
as somebody.
painting on behind you.
Okay, I speak as somebody who is not a foreign service professional, nor have I ever been in any government. So I can freely speak and take no responsibility for my views. First of all, let me say that, as has been said, at the present, there is a lot of meltdown going on in what used to be a solid structure of global governance. America, as Ambassador Civil said, is going through a very profound transition. Trump is a non-interventionist president, the first since 1945. He is almost an isolationist. He doesn't want America to get into any foreign adventure and not lose a single American soldier for fighting anybody else's war. So he wants to withdraw from Europe. He would like to shut down NATO, although that's not yet happened. And he is focused entirely on trade wars. And China, therefore, is not just a rival, but a balance of trade surplus country. In Europe, you see signs that European Union is at last perhaps getting its act together. It has behaved very well under the COVID crisis and strengthened its budgetary position. And I think European Union will emerge as a much more coherent power than it has been so far. But it will not be a military power. the European Union is a very surprising thing. It thinks that, global world peace is there forever and there will be no conflict because they have been living off American military power. So I don't know what that will do. UK is going through a very bad patch because UK has got into this Brexit problem, and given it's gone through the Brexit problem, we have an issue here. So, as far as that is concerned, globalization is more or less over, and the Cold War is, as it were, in suspension. And the main conflict in the next few years is going to be China versus the US, and with Europe maybe not taking an active part on either side, but it's going to be a war on security, on technology. It's going to be a cyber war rather than a straight military war. In that sort of conflict, what should India do? Now, my view is that India should be much more focused narrowly on its own security. I think historically India has suffered from a sort of a big power syndrome without big power capacity. We always wanted to be a world leader in something or other, moral leader of the world, or world teacher. I mean, I'm surprised listening to Ambassador Sybil that India thinks it should have a foreign policy on every country in the world. Well, it doesn't need to have that. India needs to have foreign policy for itself, for its own security, for choosing its friends carefully, so that they stay friends and don't abandon us at the last minute. So I think, in a sense, our perspective has to be Asian perspective. Doesn't matter what the Europeans think, doesn't matter what the United States thinks, they will not come to our help. We have to be helpful for ourselves, and we have to be completely focused on our own security. So given that, and I'm sure anybody else, I think the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that India should be very careful about what's happening, not just on the western side of Pakistan and Afghanistan, but on the eastern side, because that is going to be a real weak spot. The northeast, Bangladesh, Burma, those things are very much susceptible to the Chinese takeover. We have lost Nepal already, and I think we have to be very careful and be focused on our security. I think moral leadership and being the teacher of the world will come when it comes. But right now we have to be doubly secure that we get our act together and God. One thing I may just say, one more thing, which is sort of a plus factor. 20 years ago, India used to be very much a supplicant to Western countries for money, for loans. There were debts and so on. All that problem is gone. India could be an economic power, with substantial economic power. It could take advantage of the global supply chains being reordered. But for that, it has to have a genuinely forward, outward-looking policy and not go on thinking in terms of a protectionist strategy. India should stop being afraid about foreign competition and actually get into foreign competition and alter its foreign policy or shape its foreign policy to be a outgoing, competitive economic power, because that is the way India's future lies and no other way. I'll stop there because I probably have exceeded my time, but maybe there'll be questions to be asked. And if I've left things, I'm sure I've left things that I would say other people will do a better job than me. Thank you.
Thank you, Milord. Now, I had earlier said that we will have 2 minutes each second round, but to have more time for question answer, I would like to reduce it to only 1 minute, one-liners. Let us begin with Ram Madhavji. Where do you see India in next 5 years, Ram Madhavji? 1 minute. Are you there?
India has to focus on building its own club of friends in its neighborhood, not just about immediate neighborhood, not just about SAARC or BIMSTEC. Beyond that, in the Indian Ocean or Indo-Pacific region, India has to have it has to emerge as the pivot of a group of countries in this region in order to finally dictate these conditions in the region. That's, I think, should be the target for next 10 years.
Thank you, sir. Ambassador Sibal, enlighten us about current EM says world is becoming multipolar, not necessarily multilateral, multipolar. But Fareed Zakaria has been saying world has already become bipolar. We are already in the Cold War. The China and US and countries are being forced to join one another. Sir, very briefly, 1 minute. Ambassador Sibal, sir.
Yeah, no, I don't agree with Fareed Zakaria at all. How is the world become bipolar? Simply because China has become a powerful economic state doesn't make the world bipolar. There is a world beyond the US-China confrontation. Yes, the confrontation is going to affect global politics. But for the world to become bipolar means that Europe becomes a non-entity, Russia becomes a non-entity, Japan becomes a non-entity, India becomes a non-entity, Africa and Latin America become non-entities. The UN system revolves around only two powers, which is simply not the case. No, China's ideology is not attractive. It has no foreign bases. Its military is being contained by US presence in the Western Pacific. China is relatively landlocked. China has no friends. The only country which is friendly to China is Pakistan. So it's not a bipolar world at all. First of all, they have to climb over us and walk over us before they can even become the principal power in Asia. And that's not going to happen.
Okay, sir. Lord Desai, Ambassador Sibal has already said that this ambition of being 5 trillion economy in near future is perhaps not realistic. Now, as an economist, can you forecast, if not 5 years, can it become 5 trillion economy next 10 years? 1 minute, sir.
India grows when the world grows. India has to join in the world as the world grows. And I think we grew between 1998 and 2008 fantastically. Why? Because the world was growing. We have to really become internationalists, become open, competitive, lose our fear of foreign capital, and take advantage of the fact that India's large market is a very big attraction for foreign capital and foreign business. Let's go with it and not worry about protectionism. And we can become an economic power if we just shed our fears about foreign competition.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let us give a round of applause to all of our panelists who have done a wonderful job. We will have 15-minute Q&A. Major General War Veteran Ramesh Chopra, you have said you want to ask a question, sir. General, go ahead. Your microphone. Yes, switch on the mic. Use on mute. Your mic is on mute. Red color, you press it, become white. General, this red microphone, red, you just press it, become white. I think we can't hear him.
No, he can't hear you.
General, this audio.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah, now
I will mute.
Okay.
I will mute.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I want to come closer home to what the former Foreign Secretary Kanwal spoke about India, China, Pakistan. And my question pertains to this 2 war front business, or 2.5. In fact, the 4 wars that I have fought were all against one enemy. But today we are confronted by 2 adversaries, Pakistan and China, and there are threatened signs of collusion. Now, I'm confident, and we've got a chief in the audience, if push comes to shove, the security forces will take the appropriate military action. But what I'd like to have comments on, besides the military action or the military option that India can exercise because of Chinese transgressions and not de-escalating, what is the international aspect or the diplomatic aspect, economic aspect that we can bring to play to prevent this collusion or at least reduce it? And I'm not talking about what Lord Meghnad had spoken about, cyber, hybrid, and cyber. Thank you, moderator.
Okay. Suhasini, you have said you wanted to ask not one or two but three questions, one each. Suhasini has a Hindu editor. Please go ahead.
Sure. If I may address
Briefly,
a few
one each.
questions.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank all the panelists for being so direct and really saying things without any, without any sort of bark on it, if you like. The first question I'd like to ask Mr. Ram Madhav is, about a month ago, you wrote this piece about how India's soft power seemed to be giving diminishing dividends in the neighborhood. That the neighborhood, in a sense, is not seeing India's, India as a soft power, if you like, at present. At the same time, some of the panelists have mentioned, or Ambassador Surendra Kumar mentioned, the impact of Indian domestic policies that have created confusion or created animosity with countries like Bangladesh. And I mean, not just what happened with Article 370 and Kashmir, but the ones that affected them, like CAA, like NRC, for example, even what is happening now with Tablighi Jamaat members who were prosecuted during the coronavirus pandemic. Do you think, in a sense, India's soft power is being diminished by the government's hard domestic policies? So that would be my first question to Ambassador Sibal. It's interesting, you spoke about America's diminishing presence on the international sphere and how India is going to have to work its alliances depending on whether it's maritime or whether it's continental. My question is, honestly speaking, given all that China is doing, and you mentioned, that it's not just in one sphere that China is going to push back against India. Given everything China has done since, particularly this summer, across the LAC, the Galwan clash, continuing to occupy what is widely reported as Indian territory, and certainly is occupying parts of the LAC that it never has before. If this kind of threat is not pushing India into a security alliance of some sort with the United States, is it possible that nothing will? I mean, we heard the External Affairs Minister, in a sense, say that India will never be part of an alliance. Would you agree with that? And to Lord Meghnad Desai, if I could ask you to expand a bit, because you ended by saying that there is no point in this kind of protectionism of staying out of global economic pacts. And it's not just RCEP. After all, India is revising all its FTAs. They cancelled all their existing protection agreements with every European country, with about 56 countries worldwide a few years ago, haven't yet negotiated new ones. There aren't going to be new ones.
Okay.
For my question really, what is the impact of the government's new push for Atmanirbharta going to have on this trade policy when it comes to foreign relations? I'll leave it there.
Okay, so we will begin with Ram Madhavji and then Ambassador Sibal, then Lord Meghnad Desai. Ram Madhavji, to Suhasini's question.
I have always believed that this whole soft power thing is a bit overstated. We get too romantic about the benefits or otherwise of the soft power, but soft power is a proverbial icing on the cake. If you have a good cake, on that you can have the icing of soft power. But soft power by itself would become an everything in diplomacy. At least I don't believe. And increasingly, not just about India alone, but the way countries like China have behaved, the way they tried to use their soft power to enhance their strategic interests and all those things, which we see on a daily basis in the America-China rivalry and their discourse. It has now left people suspicious of soft power itself in the context of, especially with respect to countries like China. So I somehow feel that this whole soft power, we have very bloated, exaggerated concept of it, idea of it. It will have definitely certain important and limited value, but beyond that, in the new and emerging new world order, its influence is definitely diminishing. But having said it, what will it transform into? My thinking is, the new word that people are nowadays using, smart power. You have to have a combination of hard power and soft power together to address a given issue. So that kind of a smart power or a sharp power approach will have to replace it, not just thinking that my soft power, my song and dance and my scriptures and my Ramayana, my religion will solve all the problems with Nepal. If we suppose think that Nepal is finding its own Ram, how can you stop fighting the Ram? So it has to be much more than that. That has been my considered opinion, but I don't link it to domestic decisions and whether the soft power is getting diminished because of domestic decisions. No, actually, domestic decisions, how do we take them to your neighbors? It's a very important thing. For example, I will just only mention one decision that we took about the Citizenship Amendment Bill. So NRC in Assam, in the NRC discourse, we consciously used the word illegal, the phrase illegal infiltrators. We did not link them to any particular country. That was a consideration taken in our entire discourse when it came to NRC. There are the kind of certain precautions one has to take when we take certain important decisions in the interest of the country, keeping the sentiments across the border. Thank you.
Well, Ambassador Sibal, sir. Ambassador Sibal, to answer your question.
Insofar as the two-front war is concerned, first of all, I don't expect the current clash with China to escalate into a full military conflict. I don't think so. This is a long subject. I can elaborate on it, but then it'll take too much time. That's one. Secondly, therefore, I don't see a two-front issue facing us currently. Our CDS has just said today or yesterday that if the current negotiations fail, India is ready to take military action. Limited military action is possible. Whether China would like to escalate that into a full-blown conflict, I doubt very much. And here I come to my central point. Actually, it is China that should be far more worried about a two-front war than India, because China is facing a very, very formidable adversary in the United States in the Western Pacific. It has military alliances there, it has troops there, it has vital interests there. And if the United States is going to cease being the world's preeminent power, the pushback will come in the Western Pacific, not elsewhere, not in the Atlantic or anywhere else. And therefore, if US increases its carrier forces presence in this area, makes some military movements, sends in its fighter aircraft, does something in Taiwan, China will simply not risk a full-blown conflict with India. That is one. Secondly, with regard to pushing India towards some kind of an alliance with the United States, and the External Affairs Minister saying that this is not going to happen, I think one should look at the record, not only in terms of Trump, who has created huge uncertainties with regard to America's security cover for its allies. Because look at how Japan is feeling nervous, South Korea has problems, how Philippines doesn't want to rely on the United States. The ASEAN is not very sure about where the United States stands. Japan is very nervous, as I said. Therefore, if the United States is not seen as a reliable ally, even when it has defense alliances and military presence and bases and vital interests, how can we imagine that we can have an alliance with the United States with the certainty that this will work in our favor? I don't think the US would want to get involved at all in a land conflict between India and China. Yes, they can give us military supplies, intelligence and things like that, but nothing beyond that. And then, of course, if there's going to be a military alliance, then the United States has to be very clear about its policies towards Pakistan and Afghanistan. It can't carve out some of the biggest challenges we are facing to the west of us, namely Pakistan and Taliban and radical Islam and everything else, and then say, look, this is a carve-out on which the United States will keep its options open. But otherwise, they'll be with us. It won't work that way. So I think US will be hesitant to take any obligations of the nature that we may have in mind, or some lobbies in India may have in mind. And I think we are well advised to strengthen our relations with the United States, but not look for an alliance. And finally, Russia will have huge problems with Russia, huge problems with Russia. With 50-60% of the defense supply still coming from Russia. I think we have to manage that relationship, and that can't be managed if we have an overt alliance with the United States.
Okay, Lord Desai, about Atmanirbhar.
Well, let me say it this way. We wasted the first 30 years after independence on socialism and self-sufficiency, and we wrecked the economy. I'm hoping that at least our experience in 1991 has taught us that you may use word Atmanirbhar and all that, but be quite sure that you're not going to harm yourself by being protectionist. I see Atmanirbhar not as anything new, but exactly the same thing that Modi ji was saying about Make in India. Invite people to make India manufacturing base in cooperation with international power. We must learn from Asia. Asian countries, South Korea, Japan, they did not see capitalism as a foreign thing, imperialist thing. They say, hey, we can master capitalism, use our businessmen, go out there and compete. We should be doing that. We have a fantastically good private business community. We should take them and win the world with the help of our good businessmen.
Thank you, Lord. I have only time for one more question. I saw a message from General Rajendra Singh. Sir, you wanted to ask some question? General Rajendra Singh, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador. Well, my short question is, when you look at the overall context, our foreign policy, just about 3 or 4 years back, we were actually in the best of state. We had very good relation with the Islamic world. We had very good relationship with China. Even the relationship in our neighborhood was improving and was actually the best in the last decade. So what has happened all of a sudden? I think one of the major reasons, which Ambassador Kamal Sibal had said also, is also relating to one domestic policy which has antagonized a large number of our countries abroad. I think before taking a decision of this kind, which is going to impact our standing in the world, I think our decision makers need to be cautious while certainly taking a decision about CAA or any other thing. I think we could have done the same very thing without enacting this act. Thank you.
Well, this last question I would like to be answered by Sri Ram Madhavji. Ram Madhavji, over to you.
Sir, I think that's an opinion. Well taken. I don't have to. I don't have to necessarily respond to it. It's an opinion. There can be one view.
Well, thank you very much. I am grateful to all of the panelists who have such busy schedules. They have found time to come. This is a Zoom effort we keep on making in Indo-American Friends Association, the 7th, which we have done last 3 months. And I'm sure all those who attended, they must have found it very interesting, also informative, and also thought-provoking. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.